Jay Scott, welcome to the Millhouse.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, as we get going here, I just want to make mention to the audience that Jay's got the #1 podcast in the hunting world with 29 million downloads. You've been a professional hunting guide 20 years in Arizona, if
Yep.
I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
You've killed personally 2 bulls over 400, one in the 390 class, and 5 clients with bulls over 400. His sponsors, you're an ambassador to Kuyu, Go Hunt, Phone Scope, and Onyx Map.
Yep.
Jay Scott, you're one of the greats. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for coming on.
I really appreciate you guys having me. This is going to be fun.
With all that said, that's a pretty big life that you've had in the hunting and fishing world, and we're 3 days going into the season, the 2019 season. What are you seeing as a professional guide? What are you feeling right now, just prior a season?
Yeah, I mean, 2019 is an interesting year because we've had a huge winter across the Southwest. I mean, we're sitting here in Colorado and we had huge snowfalls here. Even in Arizona, where I live half the year, we've had unbelievable moisture for us. But interestingly, we were just talking before the podcast, this summer has actually been a fairly dry summer. I mean, we're sitting here in August and, it's kind of it's been dry. I mean, we virtually had no rain up here in the Aspen area, and normally we would have afternoon showers and, monsoon storms and such. So going into the 19th season, I'm optimistic, especially in, states like Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, for antler growth because of great winter moisture. It seems like, great winter moisture equates to good antlers and antler size, bone density, and everything else. It'll be interesting to see how this dry summer is kind of playing into it. But as far as what am I feeling going into the 19th season, it's funny how when elk season is right around the corner, I'm just as fired up as I was 20 years ago. And I think that's one of those things that I love about our sport and until that goes away, I'm going to continue to do what I do because I love it. I still get those feelings, deep down where I just want to be in the elk woods. I want to hear my first elk bugle, and it's just an exciting time for sure.
Do you remember the first elk you ever heard bugle? And when and where was that?
Yeah, so my dad ran a ranch for about 18 years down by Ridgeway, Colorado, which is in southwestern Colorado. So for the listeners out there, south of Montrose, Colorado, in the San Juans. And I would have to say that's probably the first place that I heard an elk bugle. It's a phenomenal property, still is, and lots of elk on it. And I just remember a guy that worked for my dad at the ranch named Scott Hill. He's the guy that introduced me and actually gave me my first elk call. And it was actually a used elk call. And he's like washed it off and he's like, just try this, and he's like, put it in your mouth and, tried to tell me how to make sounds. And then we went and drove around the ranch and found this big group of cows and calves. And they were just, yeah, 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 yeah. And I got to hear that for the first time. And then I heard he pulled out his diaphragm. We kind of snuck around and kind of got, just perfect. And he just started calling. And those cows and calves were answering back. And I remember right then I thought, I want to learn how to do that. And so I kind of credit him for, putting the first call in my mouth and kind of showing me how he did it and his style of how he did it, how he held his mouth and everything. And to this day, he's still a phenomenal caller. And it's just, turkey calling, elk calling. I love both of those things.
Before we dive any deeper into in the hunting world and fishing world, take me back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was a 10-year-old Jay Scott like?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I was raised in a family that's not a hunting family. My parents divorced when I was a year and a half, and my dad ran a ranch. He's always run ranches and stuff. And I grew up in a non-hunting family. My grandparents on both sides, I came from a ranching family, but they weren't really hunters. So as a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old kid, I was the one that my grandma would get me Field and Stream magazine, Outdoor Life magazine, any of those hunting and fishing magazines. When they have these magazine drives for school and stuff, she would always order me the hunt and fishing magazines, and I was the kid that took the corner of the page and like, oh, there's good tips on this, and
Marked it.
underlined stuff, and
Right.
like kept magazines, and was the kid that just wanted to go hunting and fishing, but really didn't get exposed to it like I probably would have wanted to. But for like my birthday, I would always say I want to go fishing down at the dock in Arizona, which is a very arid state, tough to fish. Not great fishing opportunities in Arizona. But I always wanted to get out. And then a friend of mine in grade school, probably seventh, eighth grade, somewhere in there, his one of my good friends, Jason Meldy, his parents were big into hunting, and his dad kind of took me with his two boys like I was one of theirs and exposed me to, archery hunting and all of that
Got
kind of
it.
stuff. And once I was exposed and then came where I got my own vehicle when I was 16 and could drive and could go places, that's when hunting and fishing for me really took over. I was also really big into golf, and I worked at the golf course since I was 15 years old. But getting my own vehicle and being able to go somewhere to go fishing or go somewhere to go hunting was kind of the catalyst to, me getting out there and doing it.
Right. So your father was not a hunter,
Nope.
fisherman.
Nope.
Okay.
Still not into hunting and fishing. And
Really?
people ask him all the time, well, how did Jay get so into this? And he just shakes his head. I don't know, but he's like, he's really into it.
Does he frown upon it?
Not at all. No, not at all. My parents have been, very supportive. They've been supportive of everything I've
Great.
wanted to do, whether it's golf or hunting and fishing or whatever it is.
Any brothers or sisters?
I have all sisters. So I have a younger sister that's 8 years younger than me, and I have a 2-year older sister. So
Got it.
I'm the only boy.
Are they into this world at all?
Not at all. Nope. I'm the only hunter.
You're an outsider.
Yeah, I'm the outside. I'm the black sheep of the family.
So, obviously being young, but your grandmother introduced you to these magazines. Was she from that environment?
Well,
at all?
she was a rancher's daughter, and she would take my uncles and stuff hunting, and they liked to deer hunt on the ranch and that, but not necessarily. But she saw early on that, and my grandfather too, that I really liked the outdoors, and anything to do with hunting and fishing, I was all in.
So were you as much of a fisherman at that stage, or was hunting first?
I would say I was every bit as passionate about hunting and fishing, and I still am today. People ask me, what do you like better? And my wife laughs. She says, whatever season it is, that's what he's in.
Right.
So the beauty for me about the outdoors and hunting and fishing that I think is so cool is the seasons. So we just came off what I would call fishing season. In the summer, we're fishing, fly fishing, moving water for trout, which is what I really like. Then I go into elk season, then I go into deer season, then it goes into bighorn sheep season. Then there's a little bit of a lull, kind of, February, Marchish, and then turkey season. And then I start it all over again. So the way that I'm able to go at the pace that I go, and you guys can relate, is you kind of get a break from it. And you kind of, when you switch seasons, get tired. It's hard to say you get tired of elk, but you do it for about 30 days and you're ready for something
The
different.
body gets tired too.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
it's you're mentally, physically, you're beat up, and it's fun to kind of transition. Okay, and now I need to start thinking about deer rutting, or I need to start thinking about bighorn sheep. I guide bighorn sheep in Arizona, and I guide coos deer hunts in Mexico, and so I'm able to kind of transition from one to the other, and it really gets me going. And I go hard for about 30 or 45 days on a certain animal, and then I move on.
So you got the hunting bug early on. When was there a point in time where you thought, man, I'm going to do this professionally. I'm going to start guiding, or what, did it just fall into place?
Yeah, so the way that came about in Arizona, it's hard to get a tag for elk. It's a limited entry state where, they don't give a ton of permits. And when I was in college, I actually played for a small school, Grand Canyon University, played golf in college. And as soon as kind of my golfing, once I realized that pro golf was not, I don't have the talent for pro golf, probably don't have the mental aspect for pro golf because I'm a little bit of a spaz and can get mad. I'm not that even keel. guy, it was easy for me to start transitioning and focusing on, okay, what am I going to do for a living? And that's real estate. And then it was, well, I could spend more time in the woods if I became a guide. So that's when the lights went off. Basically, when I got out of college in 1996 or 97, it was like, if I get my guide's license, then I can guide and go on these great hunts in these great units in Arizona and be able to be in Unit 9 and Unit
Right.
23 and Unit 3C and Unit 1 right during the peak of the rut, because the chances of me drawing a tag is not good.
Right.
But I can, so that's how I became a guide, and so I could spend more time in the elk woods. And so, I mean, since I got out of college, I have spent every single September, the entire month in the elk woods, chasing, videoing, bugling, just everything to do with elk bugling
Is that
and
right?
calling. I love it. Yeah.
Was did you grow up with a 22 initially? Or when did the bow come into play?
So archery hunting was another, just an extension of, if I become an archer, I have a better chance to draw tags. I can go hunt places where they offer archery seasons, and rifle tags are hard to get. So people ask me, they're like, are you a bow hunter? I'm like, I think like a bow hunter, but I'm a rifle hunter. In other words, I love bow hunting, and I'll bow hunt at any given time if I have the opportunity. And I think like a bow hunter, but I'll also hunt with a rifle. I'll hunt with a muzzleloader. I'll throw I'll throw a grenade at them, whatever.
But
Right.
your two big 400 bowls came from a bow.
I shot one with the bow and one with the rifle. Yep. Yep.
So it sounds to me like it was just the opportunity to get out in the woods and to hunt. It's
Yeah.
not no weapon of choice.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, I love fly fishing, but I love all sorts of fishing.
Right.
Right.
Same
And I
here.
love hunting, and you give me any way to figure out, I'll use a blow dart, whatever.
Right.
We'll just, whatever it takes to get it done. That's what I'll do.
Did you have a mentor?
That's a good question. I don't know that I would be able to say I had a specific mentor. Like the guy Scott Hill that I told you about that gave me my first elk call, I would say he was my mentor in calling. But I've always been one of these guys that love to read. I love to watch videos, anything I can to learn. And then, my mom used to say in kindergarten, I was the kid that would watch the kid on the swing, watch him going up and how he could really build momentum. And, do you want to try, Jay? No, no, I'm good. I don't want to try. And I'd watch him
I'm
and
learning.
watch him. And I was learning. And then once I got on, she said my teachers, I would get in trouble because I wouldn't get off. So I'd figure out how to swing, and I'd get swinging as good, and I figured it out. And then they'd have to say, Jay, recess is over. You got to go. And I'd be like, I'm not leaving. So there was some of that. But I think in all aspects of my life, I'm one of those guys that I like to watch and I like to learn, and then I like to kind of figure it out and go at my own pace. I'm not really the first one to just jump in and say, I'll try it. But then I like to do things that I'm good at, which I think we all do.
Right.
And then once you find something you're good at, I like to kind of perfect that, if that makes sense.
Because I think initially words are hard to associate and relate to. When somebody says, like when I was a skier, the coach would say, look, you've got to move the apex right here, and you've got to do something, whatever it might be. But you're trying to figure out what he's saying
Right.
until you see the video that night after the training session that day. Then you see exactly what you're talking about. So here's my question with the hunting world. Our mentor, Josh Kilbane from Steamboat, when we first started getting into this, we were trying to blow bugles and this and that, and you get into the woods, and I would think it would be really hard to become a good hunter or a good tarpon fly fisherman without somebody showing you on the water and in the woods exactly how it's supposed to sound and what you're supposed to look for. And that, I think the learning curve becomes very steep if you have a mentor.
Yeah. And I think you can pick up and kind of jump leaps and bounds if you can see it, hear it, you can see it demonstrated. I just got a golf lesson the other day from a mutual friend, Stan Utley, and he was kind of telling me, but then once he took video of me and showed me, he's like, this is what you're doing. Now this is what I want you to do. It was like, it clicked for me. So what works for me is seeing it, hearing it. I talk about having a musical ear when it comes to elk calling or turkey calling or anything like that. The best thing that trained me in elk calling was I was fortunate to spend so much time for so long in great areas where I heard tons of bulls bugling. I heard tons of cows calling. And anybody with a musical ear can hear something and then try and get where they can mimic it. You're mimicking the rhythm, you're mimicking the tone, the sound. And then once you hear that, then you take that and try and call back to them and see what works and what doesn't work.
And also understanding what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother thing to it. And I don't know that I'll ever have a full grasp on exactly what they're saying. A lot of times I think I know what they're saying. A friend of mine, Chris Rowe, I've had him on my podcast a bunch, and he really is focused on elk behavior and trying to figure out when they're saying it, why they're saying it, and all of that. And he's got some great stuff. If you guys haven't checked it out, you should. Mine has come more from just watching elk and listening to elk and then trying to call to them and knowing what works and knowing what doesn't work and then trying to reproduce that.
Right.
In my real estate business, kind of the same thing. I figured out early on, I was watching these guys and they were buying properties in bulk and then they were bringing in utilities and improvements and that they were selling them off individually and, buy in bulk, buy in bulk and then sell off little pieces. And I was watching, how they were doing it. So I did this, I started figuring out the same thing. And then I found something that worked. And that's how I became successful at developing real estate is I found something that worked. And I didn't go out and try and do something totally different. I tried to replicate exactly what I had already done. And then once I had done that, I tried to do it as many times as I could. And that's, what I do with my elk calling and other things. I just, like you guys, when you find something that you're good at, you find something that works, you just replicate it. I think too many people try and chase something new instead of just being very good at what you're good at.
Right. Jay, that being said, do you mind cow calling a little bit for
Yeah,
us? I mean,
sure.
Jay Scott is one of the best cow callers in the world.
Well, I don't know
guys.
about that, but Scott Hill taught me a lot of things, and that's the one biggest thing is I learned really early on is to kind of open your mouth at the end of the call. So we'll see here. Mouth's a little dry. That's kind of just, I would probably never blow that sequence that much in the woods, but it kind of just gives you the rhythm and the timing and the tonal quality of kind of what I'm looking for.
Well, you just said it, but the best tip I've ever heard you say on your YouTube videos is open that mouth at the end of the cow call. Everyone wants to close it.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch cow elk when they call, they never close their mouth. And sometimes their mouth is like this, and it never even moves. It's just, yeah. But then you'll see them, they'll open their mouth. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of people we've read on the old, Primos is one of the founders of, elk diaphragms and what have you, and Wayne Carlton. And on the packaging you used to read, it would say E-O.
E-O. Yeah, right.
Well, I think that's the worst thing you could do is
Yo. Yeah, I remember that too when I first got it. Yo.
It said that on the packaging?
Yo.
Yeah.
Yo.
So this is my interpretation of what they want you to do.
That's exactly
like
how I first started doing it.
E-O.
Yeah, I mean,
whereas mine is going to be. See the difference?
Right.
Most people close their mouth, shut it down, where I want to open and drop that lower jaw, and that's what gets that. Yeah.
I mean, to all the fishermen out there, and maybe they don't elk hunt or deer hunt or whatnot, they might think that that's just a really subtle change, but that change is it's a
game changer.
It's a game changer.
Yeah. It's the difference from being realistic and an elk going, that's an elk, to an elk going, that ain't right.
Especially pressured elk. You need to have that
nasal.
That nasal.
Right.
May I?
Yes.
Oh boy. Brace yourself.
Wait. Not very.
It's good. 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 Okay, my favorite part of the call is when you're, yeah. That's my favorite part. Perfect. Good.
He's got it.
Jay gave me the thumbs up.
That's a dead elk.
What makes the difference between a good hunter and a great hunter?
I think mental toughness. I think like a lot of things, I think people that are willing to suck it up when things are tough and keep going and keep plodding forward and not giving up. I think it's real easy. We've all had tough days when it's just not going well. We've had tough weeks, tough seasons where it's just, you just got to keep going. And I think you've got to be super diligent and persistent. You got to be particular with the little things. You've got to take care of all the details. You got to do, things that other people don't do, whether it be scent control or, getting your body ready to be able to, go for
Scent control. How do you do that? Do you spray?
Well,
Scent-free stuff?
I'm a firm believer that if an elk's on the wrong side of the wind, they're going to wind you
Anyway.
no matter what. But there are things you can do, like, not smelling like campfire smoke helps. I think, if you can take showers, baths, even if it's in, you're up camping, you can, clean under your arms and just try and stay as clean and as scent free as you can. I think that, goes a long way.
We were in the woods one time above Aspen in a very remote area. And a buddy of mine and I, we saw this hunter across the way. Come to find out, he's a pretty famous guy up here that runs around all the time. And so we snuck over there, and my buddy had this new camo stuff on, and we get over there, and this guy says, "Dude, I can see you from 300 yards away." And he said, "Well, we saw you too, right?" And he got downwind of my buddy, and he looks up, and my buddy's about 6'3", and this guy's about 5'8", and he goes, "Dude, you smell like a bar of soap."
He was so pissed.
He was so pissed. But two, I think good hunters and good fishermen, there's a little bit of a difference there. There's a gap because I've always felt that great fishermen can catch the fish that don't want to be caught. Great guides can find the fish that don't want to be found.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe great guides in hunting can find the elk that don't want to be found. And great hunters, too, not only know how to find them, but they can find elk that can't be found.
Well, and I
and
think
they can kill them.
I think it goes to being mentally tough and being mentally prepared, that you realize that you are searching for that needle in a haystack, and you're not going to be looking in those places where everybody's looking. And, you have to be willing to say, I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to take the easy route. I'm going to, take the ingress into the spot that takes me another hour to get there, where most guys are going to come up from the bottom. I'm going to fight my way up through and get above, and with fishing, I would think there's things that your saltwater buddies do that nobody else does. And that's why that's why they have more success, because they take their time to do everything, put all of the advantages in their favor, and do the things that are going to make them successful and not be lazy in any of the preparation. I mean, I would assume the world championships, the tarpon world championships, all the stuff you've won, there's things you've done that other people don't do. I mean, and you do it on a routine basis.
Right. You get a good team. You get a guide, good team member.
Right. And everybody's on the same page. And, one of the things with hunting, different animals and, trying to kill mature animals, trophy animals and such, sometimes it takes not shooting certain animals because that there's a bigger one around. And, you go 6 days and you're thinking, golly, we should have shot that one. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're right there and you kill the big one because you've held off. You had some mental toughness to realize that, you're after a certain animal.
All right, I got a question for you, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
After all the different species you've hunted over the years, if you had one last hunt, what would it be and where would it be? Alaskan sheep?
That last year I was exposed to my first Dall sheep hunt, and I went on 2 of them. I went in the Chugach in Alaska, and it was amazing, and went to the Northwest Territories. And so, there's a whole aspect of sheep hunting that intrigues me. So, I'd still have to go back to bull elk. I'd have to say bugling, one of the good units in Arizona, or, one of the reservations in Arizona where you have tons of opportunity. I love hearing elk bugle.
San Carlos.
I mean, San Carlos is hard to beat. They have very limited tags and have, the bulls scream like crazy. The White Mountain's an amazing place. They have a few more hunters, have more terrain, probably more elk. But, my wife always says, because I get that question a lot, and it's, whatever season. But the reality is there's something about a bull elk screaming to me
Right.
that is kind of the pinnacle of hunting for me.
Well, it's kind of interesting because you're speaking to the animal literally.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's so exciting about it is literally, as you guys know, when you can kind of get those interactions and, you're calling to that elk and he's coming to you. I mean, that's the highest point of the sport that we love. And I mean, if elk didn't bugle, we wouldn't like them near as much,
Right, for
and if
sure.
there wasn't that interaction of them calling, you trying to figure out where you need to be to set up, to have them come in, and then you call and they come to you, that's like as good as it can possibly be.
How do you don't work with anybody, but you do have a ranch now. You're the hunt manager
Yeah,
at Odd Six.
Yeah, so in 2017, a friend of mine purchased a ranch in South Central Colorado and asked me to be the hunt manager. And all my buddies give me a hard time because they're like, wait a minute, you're the hunt manager, but you don't really offer hunts. I said, well, it's for a private family. And we are in the Ranching for Wildlife program in the state of Colorado. So we do offer one public tag for Colorado residents that can apply for it. And last year was our first year actually hunting the ranch, and we killed 3 management bulls on the property. It's about 50,000 acres, and it's, elk heaven. We've got about 1,000 head of resident elk. And me and a kid that works with me, we run about 150 trail cameras, both photo and video cameras, 4K video cameras. And so I basically spend September and October every morning glassing elk, videoing elk, and then checking cameras. And then in the evening, glassing, videoing, calling, just messing with the elk. And it's, kind of a dream job for sure.
Why so much of that? Because you know where they are and what animals are there. I mean,
Yeah,
100 cameras. It sounds like, and you got
it's
1,000 elk. It sounds like it's
You're
overkill.
Duracell's biggest customer.
yeah. I mean, we definitely run through a lot of batteries for sure. Basically just trying to make the Ot 6 ranch as good as we possibly can and trying to let the bulls grow up and get as big as they possibly can. The elk, it's completely free range. I mean, we're in an over-the-counter unit, so the elk come and go, and it's just kind of fun to be able to now 2017, 2018, now our pictures in 2019, we've got bulls that now we have history with for 3 years,
Wow.
watching how they've
Growth.
developed. And you leave them and think, well, will that one be bigger? And he's the exact same size this year. And then you got one that's smaller, and then all of a sudden you have one that's blown up. And to me, that's part of the fun, of being able to watch them go from antler configuration, how it changes, how maybe it, some bulls are exactly the same. They've been the same for the last 3 years. They haven't changed at all. And then there's some that, maybe are old enough where they're starting to regress in their antler configurations, shorter points, heavier, that type of thing. And then there's some that are just blowing up that it's fun to watch them kind of progress.
I'm sure it's great for marketing as well, because if you say you have a 350 class bull on your property, that's one thing, but to see video of a 350 bull raking a tree or being in a wallow, it's just cool, and you can put it on Instagram and Facebook and
Yeah.
really market it.
It's fun. Right now, the ranch, the people that hunt the ranch are just family. Maybe in a future date, they'll offer a tag or
Got
two and sell a tag or two. So, part of the fun of it for me is basically watching and monitoring certain bulls and trying to track, throughout the rut. Do they stay in the same part of the ranch? Do they move around? And, what we've learned is those elk move a ton, just like in Arizona. I mean, our bulls will summer and then they'll go to rut usually 15 to 30 miles away.
Wow.
Very, very common for some of our biggest bulls in Arizona to I guided for 20 years in Arizona, and there would be bulls that I would never see in the summer at all. And then I would be looking for them in specific meadows, and sure enough, they'd show up. As soon as the rut hit, they'd show up. So, and then with trail cameras and the expansion of trail cameras and what have you, it's been a lot easier to track them. Say in Unit 9, they're summering here, and then they travel 30 miles, and they're killed in 7 West because that's where they want to go rut.
I've always heard that the big mature bulls and some of the bigger animals that are killed in the Arizona area, their summer and winter range is relatively close, and they don't have to endure a big winter.
That's exactly right. I mean, well, you've got what you're saying is true. A lot of times where they found in the summer, they show right back there, and that's where you can find their sheds, but they go somewhere else to rut. Now, keep in mind, some bulls rut, and they live their whole life within a 3 to 5 mile circle. But then there's some bulls that, they summer here, which is not necessarily high country like peaks around here, but it might be just, pinyon juniper terrain, 6,000-7,000 feet, and then they go to rut and they come back. So a lot of times mature bulls, my buddies that pick up a lot of sheds, the mature bulls seem to shed basically on the same ridge. They go back to the same spot. So definitely in a winter situation, they tend to winter in the same exact spot year after year. They find a place that they're comfortable with. They find a place that they can survive, kind of away from the hubbub of people and what have you. And that's where they just come back. And I have buddies that are really into shed hunting, and they'll find the same bull's sheds 4 or 5 years in a row, basically within a, half-mile circle.
How do you monitor your life? You're so busy because you're guiding, you're fishing, you're a real estate developer.
It's
a podcast king.
Well, it's one of those things that if I'm not busy, I get in trouble. So staying busy is good for me, and I'm usually good at juggling, quite a bit of stuff at one time.
So how do you hunt yourself versus guide?
It's tough. I don't hunt. I hunted a lot more years ago than I do now. I guide way more than I actually hunt personally. But I really enjoy guiding. Honestly, I would rather, this sounds kind of crazy, I would honestly rather take someone that maybe someone that's either very advanced and he's looking for something particular, or take someone that's never been and be able to see the joy on their face. And I've had some people say, "Oh, that's a bunch of bull. If you could, you would hunt yourself." Well, I can. I like guiding. I like it. I like the interaction, and I like to bring people joy. And so, my hunting personally is not as expansive as it used to be, but I still try and get on a hunt or two every year myself, and go out and just kind of do my thing.
So you'll save a couple days on a specific week in the season for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, elk hunting is pretty tough for me because, especially with this gig at the ot6 Ranch, it pretty much ties up all my time. Right. So as far as me going out and harvesting a bull elk, I mean, that's really not in the cards right now, and I'm okay with that. I love eating elk meat, and we have cow hunts and stuff on the ranch that we can do, and I can get elk meat, but I love guiding. Love it.
It's interesting you say that, because I would think that if you enjoy guiding, your client's got to be fit, he's got to be willing to endure some pain, and he's got to be a good shot. I've had friends come on my boat that I love, and after the first 4 minutes,
you want to throw them off.
It's like, why? Yeah. Why did I invite them to come?
Yeah.
They can't cast, they can't see, and now I got to push my boat for 5 days into a 20-mile-an-hour wind.
Right, and put them right on the fish, and then they can't make the shot.
Yeah, it's fine to work hard if they can get the job done, but
right.
if they have no chance, it's like...
Yeah.
Do you ever have that where you get a client and you go, oh my God, what am I doing?
Well, I like to row a boat in the summer, and the one thing I will say is I tell guys, if you can't tie your own flies and if you can't net your own fish, you're not riding with me, because I'm not tying knots, and I'm, you can.
That's good. I like that.
And it's one of those things that, from a boat rowing perspective, I totally get what you're saying. If if you're poling on the flats and you're working your butt off, and you're there to see the fish get caught, you want to see it get caught
at some point.
But if they can't make it, I've rode people down the river before where you're just like, what? I mean, I'm basically taking them on a whitewater float
Yeah.
because they can't hit the spots. I have to pull over to tie their knots. I mean, how guys do, I mean, you tie a lot of knots, you
Tie
guide
a lot of
fishermen.
knots.
Yeah,
A lot of flies
I
out of
mean,
trees.
the patience level, but the hunting I think is a little different in that I always tell guides that work for me or with me, your job is to put them in position to succeed. They're hiring you for a reason. So you have to take their weaknesses and you have to work around them, and you have to be the professional, and that's part of the challenge. If a guy tells you, I can only shoot, a rifle 250 yards or 200 yards, and you say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have to get close. We're going to have to be quiet. I would say when you pull that off, just as if took me out and I'm casting and you're just going, oh my gosh, that fish, it was a gimme. But the one time I throw it there, you would probably be ecstatic if I caught the fish and, just started bawling because I was so excited that it
Right.
was awesome. That would probably make it for you. What if you took the same guy and you're like, I'm going to waste 5 days with this guy? I hit the shot, I catch the fish, and I go, is this all it was? Then you'd probably kick me off. You'd be
Right.
like, you're a boat anchor.
Right.
So for me in guiding, I think a lot of it is I love guiding people that really appreciate it and that get excited when we have success.
Have you ever pulled, or have you ever been in a situation where you pull in a big animal and you're thinking this client does not deserve this animal?
I've never thought that they don't deserve it, but there's definitely been times when I think they have no idea what we just did. There's certainly been times where, shot some big giant thing and they know it's giant, but they don't realize it's like world class, like, top, best shot in the state that year or best shot in the state in a decade type of thing. Um, so yeah, there's been times when people have no idea, just like if you were to take someone fishing and,
Right.
they catch a 23-inch brown or something and you're like, this is the biggest fish I've seen in 5 years.
Yeah, and they're thinking, oh, that's just guide
And they're,
talk.
yeah, and or they're like, so are we,
Yeah, to
like,
get a bigger
no,
one?
you're done. Put your rod up. Let's just
Right.
enjoy it. Like, no, and maybe the same guy's going, well, can I throw in that hole? And you're like, dude, you just caught the fish of the, best one I've seen in 5 years.
Right.
Like, let's just go back to the truck and go have dinner and just enjoy it. That type
Yeah.
of thing.
So I'm gonna get a little specific in archery hunting. Um, what do you prefer, mechanical or fixed broadheads?
So if we're talking elk,
We're
it's
talking elk, yeah.
pretty hard to beat a fixed broadhead in the fact that yeah, mechanicals are getting better and better every day. The one thing that I like about mechanicals is most people can shoot the mechanicals a lot better, and they can, because people don't spend the time shooting enough and shooting their broadheads, they can just pick up and screw on a mechanical and it flies like their field point. So, on one perspective, I would say mechanicals are great because they fly like people's field points. I would say if you make bad hits with mechanicals, that's where you're running into problems. If you make bad hits with a fixed broadhead, you have a lot better chance for better penetration, a lot better chance for a blood trail, a bigger hole. You know, you've got, if you can get it in the body cavity, you've got a fixed broadhead that is going to be cutting as it's, they're wiggling around. Sometimes if the mechanical broadhead doesn't open up. So,
I totally agree with you.
I mean, I've always said, and some of these new mechanical broadheads, they're getting pretty darn good. They're making cut on contact tips. They are expanding backwards, so they're getting that expansion. But a fixed blade is pretty hard to beat.
I
Which
agree.
one in particular do you like the best?
I used to shoot those Muzzy Phantom 2-blade broadhead. They would have the actual bleeder blade to make them a 4, but I would shoot a 2-blade Muzzy Phantom because they shot really well and I got incredible penetration. The only downside to like a Muzzy Phantom is the fact that it's a small hole because it's basically slicing through. You're getting, tons of pass-throughs.
Kind
And
of like the Falcon?
I'm not familiar with that, but, you know, then there's the 3-blade broadhead, which is going to make a big hole and it's going to make a good blood trail. So, I mean,
Yeah. So
I
you
always
have,
went with penetration, and I always went with, I'm going to try and make the best shot that I can make. And I think that's part of being a bow hunter is having the discipline to know that I'm not taking that shot and I'm going to make an ethical and clean shot. And we all know that, elk are tough animals. So, I mean, I would lean to tell people fixed blade, but
Right.
I would tell you if you were an incredible shot and you shot really well, I think some mechanical broadheads these days can be deadly.
Well, it's interesting because when you were at the White Mountains, I believe that they banned mechanical
Yeah,
broadheads,
right.
I
correct?
think they're
They
still banned
Are they
there.
Yeah.
still
Yeah,
banned?
yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, Randy Ulmer, he's been known to shoot mechanical broadheads, but he's, the best shot in the world. I've known him for,
Is he?
25 years. He's
He's
unbelievable. He's probably the best bow hunter in the world, and he's been shooting a lot of animals with mechanicals, and him and his brother actually designed a mechanical broadhead. And I believe he was sponsored early on by Rage, which is a mechanical broadhead. So, I mean, I've seen elk shot with a mechanical broadhead and they die in sight, and I've
yeah.
seen elk
Right.
shot with a fixed blade. So, I
The
go back to placement,
Right. The
good
biggest thing is
good
placement,
shot
huh?
opportunity, good placement, and either one of them's going to kill them.
Do you think that's probably the biggest mistake of a novice um, hunter is lack of accuracy, lack of shooting a lot and becoming really a great archer?
I think when it comes to killing, yes, I think taking the bad shot, I think people, speaking personally, I think being able to control your emotions and make the shot count at the right time, but don't take shots that are chancy. Or, the better shot opportunity you can take, the better chance you have to kill. And you know, everybody it seems these days dances around it. We're there to kill. I mean,
Right.
we're there to kill and eat the meat, and that's what we do. But to be as effective as you can, you've got to take good shots.
It's interesting. It's the same analogy with tarpon fishing and the fact that you've got to wait for the shot. A lot of people make that long cast, the fly lands in the wrong spot, the fish never sees the
Right.
fly.
You're out of the
You
game.
got to cast again.
Right.
Now they feel the boat because you're pushing the boat, it feels the wake, and it's game over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why bow hunting as a discipline is such a cool thing because, it takes the right spot, it takes the right position of the animal, and then you have to execute the shot. And that's what makes bow hunting so special as opposed to rifle hunting because a lot of times with rifle shots, you can still make a bad shot and still get the animal. Well, you can very rarely make a bad shot with a bow and get them. So that's what makes bow hunting so unique and kind of it's like an intricate sport rather than rifle hunting where you could just pull up and blast them anywhere and pretty much going to get a follow-up shot.
So there's talk about Colorado introducing wolves back in the state. How do you feel about that? I want to hear your perspective on it.
I think I've got enough friends in the Jackson, Wyoming area and the, Gardner, Montana area. I have friends that hunted in Idaho that just say they had spots where elk and deer lived and were everywhere, and now you can't find an elk. I think it's been proven that wolves don't play well with other animals. I'm a deer and elk nut. I love sheep. I love, the ungulates, and it's hard to pick one animal over the other. I think wolves in general are unbelievably cool animals. I just think there's a place for them, and personally, I don't think there's a place for them in the Colorado landscape. I think they've been proven that I think historically in the States, Arizona, we have the Mexican gray wolf's been introduced. And I think the biggest thing, like in Yellowstone, is once they were reintroduced or, established there, they weren't pulled off the endangered species list or they weren't managed properly. I think if they were managed properly and they had a quota of X amount of wolves, which they say they do, but the reality is, I think the wolf once they get established and once they bring them back and I just don't think they'll put a cap on them. I don't
Right.
think they'll institute a hunt where we can keep them in check. And I think it's problematic. I'm not for it at all, one bit.
Yeah, it was interesting because we had a mutual friend that went over to Idaho to elk hunt, and he said that the elk were very um,
On edge,
shy,
on
on
edge, and
edge.
yeah.
Yeah, and they weren't vocalizing at all. And um, he was thinking that it's because they can pinpoint that elk, whether it be a cow or a bull, and all they're thinking about is food.
Yeah, and I mean, you hear the arguments that the wolves are going to thin out the weakest of the herd. That's just not true. They're
Right.
going to kill anything they can. It's proven. I mean, it's proven they eat every moose, elk, deer, anything they can eat. And, you know, I just don't think it's a good mix. I don't think my opinion matters. I think they're going to I think they're coming back in Colorado. Um,
Is that right?
I think so. I mean, I think it's inevitable. Um, that's just my opinion. They've just been proven to not play well with other animals.
So does that mean Grizzlies is gonna come back?
I I mean, yeah, who knows? Yeah. As an elk hunter, though, I say no wolves.
Yeah.
It's just it's like, do you introduce a piranha in your pond where you have trout? I mean,
Right.
they're going to eat every other fish in there, and then you're just going to have a piranha, or maybe a piranha isn't the best example, but you get what I'm
Right.
saying. Like,
Sure.
you've got a pond out here, and you like to go catch trout. You enter a muskie, you put it in there. No, the muskie's going to eat every single trout in there, and then what? You have one muskie.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely make hunting a lot tougher.
I mean,
For
it's
sure.
already tough around
Right.
here.
Right.
You know,
Let's talk about public land hunting. When was the last time you hunted public land?
probably 2016 elk. When we're talking elk, 2016, I drew a tag in the Beaver, Utah, which is all public land. That's probably the best premium tag that I've drawn on public land. Utah, the Beaver unit is an amazing place. Probably one of the best elk, as far as habitat places I've been. Numbers of elk, phenomenal experience. Some fantastic big bulls. The only thing about Utah that's kind of a bummer is their archery season ends on the 17th, I believe, 16th or 17th of September.
Just
So,
prior to the good
yeah,
rut.
I mean, it starts early, so you get like a month long, but it starts like the 15th or 20th of August, but they're really not bugling. My whole point of hunting elk is I love it when they're bugling.
Right.
So the archery seasons on public land in Utah just don't quite get into the rut.
But let's talk about public land where you can't draw.
hmm
You're not
Like
not talking about
OTC.
yeah,
Yeah,
Over the counter.
like how we do it.
yeah.
That
I
is really a pain in the ass.
no, I,
Excuse the ass part, but it's really hard.
yeah, no. I mean, I totally get it. Colorado is probably the best state in the country for over-the-counter elk, and it gets tons of publicity as being probably the best state for over-the-counter elk. But let's face it, you guys are locals here, and it's tough.
Very
Like
tough.
you guys go all over the state looking for over-the-counter elk, and it's tough. I haven't hunted public land OTC elk in a long, long time.
I don't blame you.
You
I want to hunt with you.
gotta cough up a chunk of cash.
The biggest thing I've always said is, there's people that's all they want to hunt is OTC, and I get it. I always say I want to put myself in the best hunt that I can, best fishing I can,
Right.
best opportunity. I want to enjoy it. And, people, the critique of that will be, oh, well, you've got it too easy. Maybe so. But I like
I'll take it.
I
Yeah.
like opportunities. I like at bats. I think our public land here in this country is, we have the best public land hunting in the world. I mean, there's no other place that has public land hunting like we do. I mean, we have phenomenal in Arizona. We have amazing coos deer hunting, amazing mule deer hunting, desert bighorn sheep hunting. Those are draws. Those are not over the counter. You've got Colorado, who had amazing deer hunting and elk hunting here. And the deer is all draw, but the elk is still over the counter. I think Colorado has an interesting situation with managing. They do a pretty good job with what they have, but they've been, the elk herd in Colorado is the golden goose, so to speak. And I would argue that, they're trying to keep all the numbers in check, and I get that, but having a lot of people come out and hunt and having it not be successful and so tough might not be the best thing for it.
Right.
Well, after 20 plus years of being a hunting guide, do you have a story you'd like to share with us that can be humorous or um, uh, emotional? Was something that is a great story that the listeners would love to hear.
Well, I can tell you one of my first, speaking of OTC elk, I'll tell you a funny story. So Scott Hill, the guy that introduced me to the elk calls, took me out, and he got me where I was making pretty decent sounds with the diaphragm here, and we went up OTC elk. This is probably, let's see, I'm 46. This is probably 25 years ago. And I go up first elk hunt. I've got the bow. I'm all dialed in with the call. And we lead the mules up. We go like 3 or 4 miles up there and we set up a camp. And I'm thinking, this is fantastic. He says, Dad and I are going to go this way. Why don't you kind of go up that way and see what you can find? So I kind of wander up the trail. It's getting light. And I'm just easing up this trail. And so I thought, well, I'll just try and call. So I blow a couple cow calls and didn't hear anything. Kind of went up the trail a little bit further, blew a couple cow calls. And I thought, golly, it sounded like a bull squeal, just kind of a little weenie squeal down the hill. So I cow called a couple more times and it squealed back. And I thought, holy smokes, that's an elk. And I can tell it's coming. So I sit there and I kind of get ready. 3 bulls end up walking right up this trail, and they're just kind of walking head down, just kind of coming up like that. And this is what I can tell you I remember. I remember drawing back, and I remember my arrow stuck in an aspen tree going. I don't remember looking through the peep sight. I don't remember anchoring. I don't remember anything. I do remember literally the old Easton aluminum arrows. It was stuck going. That sound of like, you probably stuck one of your trees out here and heard it. And those bulls just looking around like this, have no idea. I'm so rattled. I'm trying to get another arrow out of my quiver and, get that whole thing. And by the time I do that, they've spooked off. And I thought, here was my opportunity, first day out, to be able to come back and be like, I got one. What's the big deal?
Right.
And totally blew it. I mean, the best I can calculate is I shot 2 feet over that first bull that gave me the opportunity. I mean, I could have shot any of the 3. I didn't look at any of their antlers other than there's 3 bulls and here they are. And I shot 2 feet over their back.
Oh, that's funny.
So, I mean,
Tell me about your 400 you killed with your bow. Where was that?
Yeah, so in 2006, I killed a 406 gross bull with my bow and arrow. That 2006, I don't know how it was up here, but in Arizona, it was a drought year. I had previously hunted 04. I shot like a 390s bull. 05, I shot a big bull with my rifle on the San Carlos that was 427 gross. It was a 7x7 mainframe, but he had a broken G6 on the right side. And if he would have had that G6, he would have grossed 440 typical.
Oh.
And he would have netted 424. Instead, he netted 404.
Wow.
The beautiful thing about and I don't know how it is now, but the San Carlos hunt was 2 weeks long. And I bought those hunts in 04, 05, and 06 because it's a 15-day season. It's the first 15 days and the second 15 days of September. And yes, they have big bulls, but the reason that I bought those tags is for the calling, the bugling, just the excitement, calling in, a dozen to 15 bulls in a morning, having them just come in screaming. Wow. That's why I bought the tag. So I shot the big bull in the really big bull in 05, and then 06 was a horrible drought year. Like even on the San Carlos, it was hard to find. I mean, they were still big mature bulls, big fronts, but like little back points.
And that's what happens when
in Arizona, when we have drought, typically the tops are short. So I hunted, I think on the 9th day, there was this bull and he just had this goofy bugle, and I had heard him in the morning. And he just had this real distinct kind of wolf-sounding kind of howler kind of bugle. And I thought, I just want to see what this bull is. He didn't have like a big growly bugle, but he had a bugle that I could hear and go. And that's what I like to do. I I like to find a bull and hear that bull, and then I say, I want to call that bull in, and then call him in, and then hear something else. And so this one was easy because he had a really distinct bugle. Afternoon, I go out. On the San Carlos, you have to have an Indian guide with you, which I did. And I'm like, that's that bull. Let's go see what he is. So we snuck up there and he was bugling. I wasn't calling. I snuck in there and yeah. And he bugled and I could tell he was coming. And he came and he kind of came under this tree. So it was like this juniper tree and he kind of was fighting his way through it. And I just saw his fronts coming and they were big and, they just swept up like that. And I was already at full draw, and it was like 12 or 15 yards, and he just came out, and I stopped him, shot him, and he spun around, and when they get that look where they're just like, just wobbling around, and I knocked another arrow. I wasn't going to have happen what happened to me the very first time. I knocked another arrow, and he turned around the other way, and I shot him going through the other way. So I double lunged him both ways, and actually watched him fall over and die. And he's 406 gross, but he only has 9-inch fifth points. And normally a bull, like he has 25-inch thirds, 22-inch seconds. He's got a extra eye guard on one side, but he's only got 9-inch fifths, and he still scores 406. I mean, normally a bull would have minimum of 15-inch fifth points. Probably a bull of that caliber would have, on a real year, he'd have 20-inch fifth, and he'd be, 11. He'd be 22 inches bigger. So I mean, he would have been 428.
Oh my gosh!
On a normal year.
Right. That's a monster.
Yeah.
How'd you get into the podcast? And how'd you get such a great following? I mean, obviously you're very good on camera. You're good at what you do, but how did this whole world, this new chapter of your life come to be?
Yeah, so for a long time, like 8 or 10 years, I ran it was J. Scott Outdoors blog. So I actually, through Google, I did a blog for like 10 years, and I just wrote and took pictures about my hunting and fishing adventures. And so I kind of had that base set, and I had people that, I did a lot of field judging stuff. I did a lot of elk calling videos, a lot of stuff trying to be in, helping people in educational, instructional, that kind of thing.
You had a lot of content out already.
I already had a pretty good base of content, had a really good following on the blog. And it was one of the things that I would do a blog post about every day. And I did it for like close to probably 8 or 10 years. I had taken the meat eater, Steven Ranella, hunting. I took him to Mexico Gould's turkey hunting, which I guide for Gould's turkeys. And the one particular property had buffalo on it, free-ranging buffalo. So I took Steve down on a hunt, and he filmed 2 shows. We filmed the Gould's turkey episode, and we filmed the buffalo episode, and got to know him. And to make a long story short, he's come multiple years and hunted deer. I do DIY coos deer hunts as well as guided, where people can come down and just hunt on their own. I set them up on the ranches. And in January of 2015, I had just got back from Mexico, and Giannis, who is a friend of mine that was a fly fishing guide in Vail, and I kind of helped put the two of them together. To make a long story short, Giannis is now the producer of the Meat Eater show, and those two are really tight. Giannis sends me a email and says, hey, I've got a podcast episode that we just launched. I want you to listen to it. My response was, what's a podcast? And he said, just listen to it. So I listened to it. It was like an hour-long show, and it was Steve doing Steve's thing. He's phenomenal.
He is phenomenal.
He's phenomenal. He's a great ambassador for hunting and fishing and outdoor lifestyle, and a good friend. And I listened to it, and I thought, this is great. And Giannis and Steve both said, hey, Jay, you should do a Western hunting and fishing podcast. Well, I immediately was kind of like, well, I don't want to step on your toes. You just show. And he's like, no. He's like, I mean, you can talk about tons of things. I felt like I'd be like competing. They're like, no, start. So I said, what equipment do I get? So they said a Zoom recorder, and they basically gave me the checklist of stuff. And I thought, well, yeah, let me give it a try. So 2 weeks later, I was up and running, and it was a great way for me to have guests on the show and kind of extract information on hunting and fishing certain animals and really get into strategies, tactics, kind of really dive deep on, how do I help someone kill their first Coues deer?
The
How do I,
nuances of
yeah,
all this
all
stuff.
of the
Yeah.
stuff, that we as sportsmen talk about with our buddies all the time. And my wife's like, you're already talking, I was at the time, because of the blog, fielding a lot of emails and calls from people asking me the same stuff. So it was a perfect way for me to then publish the content and get it out there for people to, learn. And it's just been a huge blessing for me to be able to help a ton of people and get, emails, just countless direct messages on Instagram of, man, your 10 episodes before Coues deer season with all those different guides has helped me and upped my game. All the podcast episodes on elk hunting, I was able to follow all those things and listen to those scenarios that you guys had talked about. And I killed this bull because of listening to your podcast. That's the part of it for me that's so rewarding, is truly every day I get messages from people saying, I learned that from the guests on your show. And if it weren't for that, and it's free to them. That's what I think is so beautiful about podcasts. And I think that's why it's been so widely received and people really enjoy podcasts, is the fact that it's free. They can listen, and, the sponsors of the show make my time and you guys' time where you can do that. I've just released, I think, my 601st episode. So I try and do 8 to 10 a month. A lot of months it's, 12 or 15 episodes, and it doesn't feel like work. I enjoy it.
Giving feels good.
Giving feels good, and it's fun to really have people send you a sincere message and say, thank you. And I wouldn't have been able to do it. And I feel like hunting and fishing has given me so much. It's so easy for me to try and help other people. There's so much joy that I've gotten from calling elk and calling turkeys and, catching fish and what have you. And that joy that I have, being able to enjoy the sport, I want to pass it on to other people. There's nothing better there's no better compliment than someone saying, hey, I decided to go fishing because I watched your Instagram and I liked what I saw and I decided to do it. A month ago, I had a guy say, my 10-year-old son was watching your videos and said, Dad, take me fishing. He took me fishing. He sent me a picture.
You're changing lives.
It's awesome.
Good for you.
Yeah.
What's your next goal? Where do you go from here?
That's a good question. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. I think part of being busy, sometimes it's hard to kind of sit and go, okay, what's next? Right now for me, 600 episodes, I keep in the back of my mind thinking 1,000 episodes. That's a lot of work. That's 400 more episodes. But there could be 2,000 episodes. I don't know.
You're a young man. You got a lot ahead of you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think is so exciting about hunting and fishing is I fish with people all the time, friends that, I fish with once or twice a week that are 75 years old, 73 years old, 78 years old that still love it. They're still excited in the morning when I pick them up in the car and they're like, let's go fishing. Maybe they'll eat a hopper today. I mean, that's what's so cool about the outdoors is, yeah, there's things that you can't do, your body eventually can't do, but, there's still a lot of things you can do.
It's everlasting.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at the stage where I'm at now, I mean, we're still lucky but I am on the cusp. I've had a lot of injuries. I've had 13 knee operations. I got an artificial, prosthesis, knee replacement. Had my back fused about 2 years ago. And it's like now, being very realistic with this, it's like, okay, do I buy landowner tags? How can I stay in the game?
Yeah. And I think I always say, there's always the critique that, oh, it's, becoming a rich man's game and what have you. And I say, well, it's becoming an opportunities game.
Right.
And if someone can buy a landowner tag and hunt private land or hunt in a unit or a reservation or somewhere where it's going to give them a little bit better chance, and you've worked hard and you can afford it,
Why not?
do it.
You know, it's
Why not?
interesting. I've always been seeing and comparing, and I feel this in that you have Unit 10. I went over there scouting about a month ago with a buddy of mine that drew a tag there this year.
Mm-hmm.
Unit 10 is more private than private
Mm-hmm.
because you can't 20-some points, 23 points. That is like, yeah, sure, it's public.
You
Right.
can't buy it.
You can't buy
Right.
it. There's no access, so that's more precious than the San Carlos and some of these other big ranches where you can buy a landowner tag or
For sure. For sure. And, a lot of these Western states have gone to a draw and a system. And, there's people that say, well, I wish it was just over the counter for everyone. And, the flip side of that is, well, when you do draw that tag, it's phenomenal.
Special.
And maybe it's a once in a lifetime. And maybe you hunt OTC the rest of the state, but maybe you wait and you apply and you 22 years
Right.
and you get the tag of your life.
But you know what's funny? They say, I got this on public. I killed this elk on public.
Well, they did.
Yeah.
They did, but it's like, yeah, right.
And that's been the gripe about Arizona is like, well, this is public land. And it's like, yeah, there's only 100 tags. You take the state of Colorado, and if you limited it like you did in Arizona, you would have, in my opinion, just as big of bulls as here.
Right.
You think?
As there.
Absolutely. I think the genetics are just as good here. I think over time when you have, well, this is a whole different argument, but over time, potentially with being able to just shoot every bull on the mountain, maybe your younger bulls are maturing or rutting and doing the breeding, but it's still the same genetic. Whether they're a 3-year-old or a 7-year-old, it's still the same
They
genetic.
just get harvested.
But they might not have the same feed.
That's true. But if you go look in Arizona, you'd be like, what are they eating compared to here? Like if you took Arizona elk and brought them up here, they'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm in heaven.
So the Rocky Mountain, elk itself, you have the Roosevelts and the others,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a different, DNA, if you will. They've always assessed with tarpon fishing, are these African world record 285-pound tarpon the same tarpon that we fish in the Keys? But you're saying that these are Rocky Mountain elk. So regardless of the winters and the feed, they may be just as big.
Well, I think there's certainly animals have the ability to adapt to the conditions that they're in, okay? But I think it comes down to age class. If Colorado had the same age class as Arizona, take Utah, for instance. Utah and Colorado have very similar terrain. Utah limits the number of tags in a lot of units and have premium units, and they have giant elk. And even some of the great units in Colorado, they have a lot bigger elk than the majority of elk on over-the-counter units. If you limit the harvest, they're going to be older.
Right.
Most of the time when they get older, they're going to have bigger antlers. Just like what we're trying to do at the Odd 6 Ranch is we're trying to get the age class of our elk as high as we possibly can and let them be what they are.
Right. All right, we've got 3 days to the opening of the season. What do we do next week? How should we approach the over-the-counter no-tag unit?
I think, in my opinion, early season is probably one of your better opportunities to call in a bull. Now, they're going to probably come in silent.
Right.
You're not going to hear them coming. On one hand, I think a lot of people put too much emphasis on early. Whereas if they would just wait when they're actually bugling and getting going a little bit, that they have a better chance to get up there and get a bull that's fired up. Early in the season, I think if you can go and you can find some elk and get in close to them and do some of that cow calling that I heard, you're going to have a chance to have elk come in. But I think you have to be patient because a lot of times they're going to come in quiet.
And maybe limit your calls.
I mean, maybe limit your calls. Either go in with the strategy that we're going to call like crazy and we're just looking for one, or go with the strategy of we're going to try and find them with our eyeballs, try and glass them up, figure them out, and then ease in there where they're coming in and going out of meadows or what have you and put a good play on them. There's the train of thought of just, I'm going to call like crazy and it just takes one. I get that. Early in the season, I think you can probably make too much chaos, call too much, and potentially push elk away because they're
Right.
like, what's
Right.
he doing over there?
Right.
He's
Right.
bugling like crazy. Fred, what are you doing? We're not doing this for 2 more weeks.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know what's
yeah.
worked well for us in the past? I know it has for you, most likely. I'm speculating, but we've killed them before where you go in, you make maybe one small young bugle,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe hopefully have somebody answer,
Mm-hmm.
then sneak over there and just start softly cow calling.
Mm-hmm.
But this time of year, you may not be able to find a bull that'll answer you.
Yeah.
Right?
Another tip that I can give you that I think is probably the most underutilized thing is raking a tree.
I had a feeling you were going to
Right.
say that.
Raking a tree because,
With the bugle or just raking?
yeah, I mean, I would rake a tree. So what I love to do is if I know where elk are at, I like to try and get as close to them as I can. And if I can get in close and then have a buddy, so we've penetrated in close to the herd, we've got the wind right, and we come in close and we start raking and we don't make any other sound.
Just rake.
The reason we're going to do that is a bull's going to be sitting over there going, who is this that just snuck into me and my cows and he's raking? And now he's not bugling to let me know who he is. The curiosity factor alone drives him nuts.
Really?
If you're over there bugling too, sometimes a dominant bull will be like, I'm going to go over and kick his butt. The bugle that I would throw in if I was raking would just be little squeals.
Right.
I would try and sound like the little pipsqueak that's gotten
It's gonna
close to the
steal
bull,
somebody.
and he might steal some cows. Most of the time, that bull's going to come over and be like, not on my watch, you're not.
Right.
So and the other thing is taking a set of antlers, and even if it's a set of deer antlers, and having them and
So like this, maybe two young bulls, kind of like sparring.
because you've heard them.
Yeah.
Right.
So you've seen them sparring, and they make little whines. Who doesn't want to
Like dogs.
Who doesn't want to see
Yeah.
a fight?
Right.
And I think that's another super underutilized tool of and especially early season is clanking some antlers together. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times I've been watching two bulls just sparring and bulls just show up. Who's fighting? Oh, okay. So I would throw some of that into your setups. I wouldn't be afraid to do a little bit of cow calling, maybe some, small bull squeals, and then have one of you kind of doing some raking. And it's simulating, hey, there's stuff going on over here. And, it might not be the biggest bull come in, but if you're just trying to kill an elk, it's a great way to kill an elk early.
I've also heard that raking a tree with an antler sounds much better than with a stick.
Certainly. Then you got to carry an antler, but if you carried like a little 4 or 5 point, shed,
It's not that heavy.
yeah. And if you could clank you guys got a bunch of elk antlers around here, you might try it. I'm telling you, if you clank elk antlers in early season, it is money.
Really?
Money.
You got to write that down, Dad.
Your money.
Yeah, no, it's money. I'm telling you, man.
Oh. What would you like to just throw out there for these neophytes, if you will, trying to figure it out?
As far as elk,
Yeah.
He just gave us some tips.
I think people bugle too much. I think they should lean more on cow calling, and the reason I think people bugle too much is most people aren't really good at bugling. It doesn't sound quite right, and it's a longer call. Whereas just some nice short cow calls, yeah. Well, how many times have you been out in the woods and you hear someone bugle and you go, that's a hunter?
Right.
The reason most of the time is, one, it doesn't sound quite right, but two, it's a long call. So you have a long time to listen to it and be like, that's not right. Whereas if you just heard someone go, yeah, you kind of hear it. And then when you're trying to hear it again, it's not making the call.
Right.
And you can't go, that's fake.
Yeah, it's too quick to analyze.
It's too quick to analyze. That's great. It's too quick to analyze. So, and not that bugling doesn't work, because it does, but I think people probably bugle too much
Or too long, too.
or too long.
Right.
How about this?
Let's hear it.
if you don't mind.
I love that tube. That's a classic tube. Perfect. I mean, and even that, you could even carry the high pitch even a little bit longer. But I love the fact that you didn't go, and a lot of people get into this huge growl and stuff at the beginning. I like how you went straight, kind of high pitch, just small bull squeal, and ended. Perfect. I think you'll call in plenty of elk if you just do that, because
That's how we normally
that's
do
a
it.
small bull, and most of the time that's not going to offend a small bull. He's not, you're not sounding like the biggest bull in the woods. I think people just get these huge growls and this, just sound like a giant bull. Well, if you're trying to just kill a branch antlered bull, you don't want to offend or have a 5-point go, oh, I don't want anything to do with that. You want him to be like,
I got it.
I got it. This guy,
But you know what's really interesting too, as you mentioned before, is that I've heard bigger bulls say or speak so softly and quietly, like a small little.
Yeah, so that's
with no
like
big
tending
growls.
their cows and herding their cows. If you think of it from their perspective, they've got a few ladies over here, and they don't want to draw attention.
Right.
And a lot of times you'll hear the glunking where it's, I don't know if I can make it with this bugle, but
what is that?
So that's their diaphragm. They're going gong, 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 gong. That's them tending their cows, saying, I'm the boss, but I don't want to let other bulls know that I've got you. If you had a circle of 5 of the hottest ladies you've ever seen, and you have them over here in this room, and you're talking to them and everything's going great, and your buddies are out there, you think, hey guys, come over here. No, you kind of gonna keep these 5 to yourself.
Yeah,
so it's just
keep it quiet.
Yeah, keep it quiet. And that's why I think sometimes you hear some of these big bulls and you just hear sometimes you'll just hear these little squeals out of them.
Do you do that often? Do you clunk it? For any reason?
That tube that you have is better than this tube. And the old Primos. Yeah, so the old Primos tube. So you don't want.
Right.
You want. So have you heard bulls do that?
Yeah, for sure.
So that's glunking.
Yeah.
And that is a very, usually you hear it when you're very close to elk. And the other thing is if you can, like if a bull was bedded over there at 70 yards, I didn't say a word, and he's got cows, and I got up to him and went, he's going to go bananas.
Really? So
Bananas.
you do that sometimes?
Absolutely.
I used to think when I first got in the woods and heard it, I always thought it was a sex organ banging the stomach.
We could only be so lucky, right?
Right.
That's funny.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of those things that you can do, raking, glunking, tickling antlers together, gets that curiosity part going. And especially early season, I wouldn't be afraid to try it.
Thank you. Well, here's a gift for you.
Oh, man.
It's my book.
That is
Passion
awesome.
for Tarpon, which is a methodology that I used for a number of years when I was successfully tarpon fishing. But it's also, I think, more important, it's a story about the fish.
Yeah.
It is a story about the fish, and it's also a story about the innovators, all the guys that started the sport back in the 60s and the 70s, and their stories about success and losses, the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like what we've been speaking about elk hunting. And I think you'll enjoy it.
I really
a fisherman
appreciate
and
that.
a hunter, too. Tarpon fishing is all about hunting.
That's awesome, and you signed it here. That's amazing. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful book. When I was up here a couple weeks ago, I got to thumb through it, and it just speaks volumes for you. A passion for tarpon is the title, and it speaks volumes of you of being able to do a book and make it about the fish. And so thank you for that. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys having me up. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Before we before we leave, tell the listeners where they can find your podcast and can tune into your next adventures. And
Sure. J. Scott Outdoors, Western Big Game Hunting and Fishing Podcast. Simple. You can just search J. Scott Podcast on iTunes or anywhere that you can find podcast. I'm on everything. And then probably the best way is my Instagram at J. Scott Outdoors. I love fielding direct messages and interacting with people. And so Instagram has been an amazing tool to be able to connect with people. And, that's how you and I got
Right.
connected in the first place. So yeah, J. Scott Outdoors podcast, and then at J. Scott Outdoors on Instagram. And love to talk hunting and fishing with anybody. And if I can do anything to help you guys or help anybody else, I'll do it for sure.
great. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, it's been super fun.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much. You're the best.
When I saw his West Side Story,